Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading video for Friday, February 10th, 2023. Definitely going up on a Saturday, but This is my first AM reading video of the month, so I feel like the last 10 days have been kind of busy. Maybe this is justification because I don't feel like I have as much to share this video in terms of reading as I'd hoped to. Possibly because I was also rapidly trying to finish up my January reading, but I did have a concert at my synagogue where I sang with the choir there, and that was a culmination of something that was really beautiful. It was about kind of stepping back into the space after COVID and taking stock of, all we lost during the time when we were separated, and moving forward. And there was singing and dancing and artwork and acting and all sorts of stuff. It was just really great. And it was even, we've been doing all the live stream stuff for years now, so it was recorded. So it's kind of fun to watch yourself from a distance too. So I could link that down below. And this week I've been up to prepping for my beta readers group. I belong to a sci-fi fantasy beta readers group where we're all writing SFF novels and slowly reading through each other's stuff, or actually the word counts are getting longer, so I've been taking more time to, try to get through them and do them the justice they need. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. And as I said, I wrapped up January reading, so in that vein, I will share my latest literary newsletter down below, which I post monthly to my reading and writing blog. I recap all of the literary news that caught my fancy. I have snippets from my Goodreads reviews of all the books I've read that month. I have a book pick and a book quote and etc. And another thing that I posted late last month is this sort of a fun comparison that I did between Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr and then this book, The Actual Star by Monica Byrne. She's a far less well-known author, but it's a similar sort of story in that it's multiple timelines going from past to future, and I feel like they were both trying to explore sort of like huge themes about like humanity's journey. That's sort of the pompous title I gave it, but it was really fun to compare and contrast the books, so I will link that down below. And now I should go ahead and get this book back to the library. I have no good reason to keep it. I'm too overwhelmed by my current reading to give this another look, although part of me would like to, because the world building in this is so detailed. It would be nice to give it a look, especially since I actually listened to it on audio, so to actually take a look at the physical stuff would be interesting. And it's just a nice book too. It's very fresh, like a new book smelling book. There's some great artwork behind the chapter heading sort of stuff. But anyway, I think I'll be getting this back to the library. I have new books to pick up anyway. And that's probably enough beating around the bush in this intro, especially since I should try to make this a little snappier, because I have some big weekend plans coming up. So anyway, for the past 20 months, I believe it has been, I started my AM reading videos by reviewing one short story in a collection of Dorothy Parker short stories, a project that I finished up at the end of last month. And then I said I would like to continue the project with a new collection of short stories, and the collection I chose is Oi Caramba, an anthology of Jewish stories from Latin America, edited by Ilan Stavins, which I've been very slowly reading from year by year for my try a story tags, and now I'm going to go a little bit faster and do one per AM reading video, so huzzah! And the story I read this week is Remembrances of Things Future by Mario Szichman. He is a man who immigrated from Poland to Argentina. And this short story actually takes place in Poland in 1939, that year. And it's a satire about the culmination of anti-Jewish violence, which ends in the Holocaust. And it takes place in this small town in Poland where this man Shmulnik has disappeared as an infiltrator, is what happens to Jews in the area, and his mother is completely sort of ignorant and beside herself about where her son might be. He works for this company that makes Hebrew calendars, so she's constantly berating them to see where her son is, and they're terrified of the authorities. And ultimately, the authorities do catch on to what's going on here, and they start looking for Shmulnik as well as this infiltrator who, is doing something dastardly with the Hebrew calendars, and it's highly satirical the way they're looking for people with their hands in their pockets, and people all across Europe are coming across these Hebrew calendars and thinking that they're sort of in code for enemies across, the war's lines. And the Jews who are desperately trying to escape constantly find themselves, being denied at every port at sea, and stalling, in the waters, and being emaciated like ship after ship locked together. And there's references to, the Jude stars in Germany, or, this apocryphal tale in Ukraine of how Jews are forced for amusement to fight bears and then not be denied exit from the country, that sort of thing. And they're saying in Poland it's not that bad here, while meanwhile the authorities are slowly stripping freedoms away, and trying to get the Jewish calendar makers to change the Hebrew calendars to sort of erase Jewish history. And there's especially a poignant moment where you realize that all of the pogroms, the anti-Jewish violence that they have dated on the calendar that have happened to the community, coincide with Polish holidays. So there's, the nationalist fervor that led to the pogroms. So yeah, it's very highly sort of satirical, and just a look at just the ravages of anti-Semitism, and just how unreal it sort of can feel. The only book I finished officially for the month of February is Empire of Exiles by Erin M. Evans. This was one of my anticipated reads that released late last year in November, I believe. A epic fantasy novel, heavy on the world building, and it takes place in large part in an archive. So I was very excited for that. I wanted something that was a little more distant from, the sword and sorcery stuff, or well, not so much sorcery, but definitely sort of the military swordplay stuff. This, in fact, is a bit of a murder mystery novel, so it goes more into a genre where I'm not usually spending my time. It's a very plot-heavy novel in its way, which is unusual for me, but I was still drawn in because of the really detailed, rich world building. I held up the actual star earlier, where Monica Byrne has a glossary of all of the rich, detailed world-building terms in her novel, which I wish that Evans had done as well, although what she does have is a large cast of characters, so they're in the beginning of her novel, and I kept, flipping back to remember who was who. But anyway, I think what, really intrigued me about this in terms of actually falling for the mystery plotline, murder mystery, is, it's all about this world building stuff rather than our real world. So I don't know, I found it much more compelling to get to know this world. This world, it takes place in this Empire of Exiles. There were once, I believe, 10 kingdoms of humans and humanoids who lived across, I guess, the land, as it were. But they were infiltrated by these changelings who could take on the form of each other, of real people, and, create havoc that way, turn people against each other because you think you're seeing a loved one, and that loved one is actually an infiltrator who has a nefarious agenda, and I think they're usually maybe controlled by sorcerers and that sort of thing, or at least that's the case in this novel. So the truth is that all of the refugees of these human and humanoid countries come to Samia, which is was a ethnic state of its own, but then it became an empire for everybody else, and they, build a magical wall around it so that the changelings can't get in, and they go along, attempting to go along their merry way, being ruled over by Samian emperors and empresses, and that sort of thing. But there's a bit of an upset in the royal family when a younger brother kills his brother emperor and entire family, and suddenly everyone's a little less sure of this reigning family and who they are. And in that chaos comes a duke from, previously another land who is able to, resurrect in a way, one of the princesses who the uncle was supposed to have killed. So basically supposed to be the next in line for the throne, whereas the throne instead has passed on to the third brother. He's just trying to upset the apple cart and install himself as her sort of regent and rule in her stead, and usurp the current emperor, but he is defeated and executed, and then the main story takes place 30 years later under, there's a new empress who's the daughter of the one who, won in the end, and things seem to be going along okay in this new society until there's another sort of grievous murder, and it's tied into all sorts of things, political things having to do with the wall and balances of power and ownership stuff, all of those nitty-gritty details that you build up to say who has motivation to do what, which, in all honesty, some of it kind of goes over my head. I'm not a huge person for details. I feel like that's the puzzle box sort of reading that I'm not good at, so I don't usually read mystery novels. I just sort of let it wash over me and be like, oh, this is so cool. We're looking into the archivists who have control over all of the relics of these kingdoms, and there's magic in them. And in fact, some of the archivists who are there have this special affinity for like ink or bronze or that sort of thing, where they communicate with them, but then those elements could call to them and sort of draw them into a spiral. And so I think Evans was really keen to explore magic that was sort of based on anxiety. And so that's something that's going on with the archivists, is that the specialists know a lot about, their elements, but they also can be drawn into these anxiety spirals and then have to be pulled out of them to, remember who they are. And so that's going on, and they also have a guild for scribers who do legal documents, and one of the scribers, Quill, gets involved with the archivists once his friend is involved in the murder mystery plot, and things move on from there, and things are uncovered in this highly detailed world which Evans created, which I really enjoyed, even though I feel like in most cases the characters weren't the selling point for me. There was just too much plot going on to give a lot of them that much dimension. I guess the ones that stood out to me the most were probably Quill, who was this scribe who his friend supposedly was the main murderer. And he was trying to come to terms with, did I not know my friend? Or, he was just in this sort of thing of grief about who his friend was and what was really going on, that I found touching. And then Amadea is sort of the main archivist who takes care of the specialists. And she's this really lovely, nurturing, like middle-aged woman character who treats these people like as her children who she wants to protect. And it's just this, this characterization of being a nurturer that was just so nice to see. And it was tied into the fact that she was taken advantage of when she was a child in significant ways that you find out through the plot. And it was just nice to see how that, influenced her in her adulthood like that. So those two characters particularly stood out to me, but there's a lot of just wonderful plot and world building elements. It's just fun to see how you can imagine how magic and cultural society might go together, and royalty and all of that. And I had a lot of fun with it, and I'm definitely looking forward to picking up the sequel. And I guess the final thing I'll say about this book before I set it down is I was reading it also alongside, as I said, reading the beta reading chapters for my sci-fi fantasy group, which I found really fun. Like, I found it sort of invigorating. I usually listen to most of my science fiction and fantasy on audio, and I enjoy that as well, but I don't know, there was something maybe about reading this book and then concurrently reading the chapters of my beta reading companions to just sort of stay in that sort of imaginative SFF mindset that I really enjoyed. So I guess I'm hoping, and I'm pretty sure I can, like, pick up a physical copy of a science fiction or fantasy book next month when I'll be back to their new chapters, and maybe we'll see about doing this again. Next, I'm just a couple of short stories into this collection, Jerusalem Beach by Iddo Gefen, which was translated from the Hebrew by Daniela Zamir. I'm reading this and another Israeli short story collection together in tandem, again to sort of compare and contrast, and I think I'll do a video about the two of them later in the month. I'm in very early days of this project. I'm only 2 short stories into this first book. They were very long short stories, to defend myself. There's going to be some shorter ones coming up, so I'm hoping I can get through this collection a little faster. Always so much to read. But that being said, I very much enjoyed the 2 short stories. Probably the first one a little more than the second. The first one is called The Geriatric Platoon, and it takes place shortly after a woman, Miriam, dies in Israel, and her husband, who is in his 80s, decides, you know, in his, I guess, mourning, as it were, he decides he wants to join the IDF as an infantryman, which, is hugely unusual and not required of someone that age, obviously, but it's what he does, and he's particularly gung-ho about it. We get into the culture here that sometimes men, usually of that age, do enlist or are perhaps prodded to enlist by their families who otherwise don't want to take care of them or don't have the means to take care of them. But in the case of this man, he wanted to. And the POV character is his grandson, who actually took part in the Lebanon War. So this book takes place, I think, in 2009, this story, I should say, a few years after Yuli was discharged, and like in the back of this is also the reality that Yuli experienced things in the war that he hasn't been really dealing with. And so that's part of what's going on there. But mostly there's just a lot of family elements coming into it. We have his grandfather going off to the infantry and isn't happy with the fact that he's given a glorified assignment, in an area that doesn't really need protection. And his father is this sort of analytical minded sort of accountant type guy, one of those jobs. He isn't very good with like people skills, and in fact his wife left them and now works for the Jewish agency in India as like a I guess an advocate would be the technical term for Israeli tourists in the area. And she comes into this story through the form of emails that she's trying to send her son to try to kind of get back in his good graces, but he, I think, has blocked her until the very end of the book, the story. I don't know, that stuff, I don't know, I found it a little moving to try to get her perspective, but, it was more divorced from the main action of Yuli trying to track what his grandfather is up to and, if he's in any real danger and, because, he can't be running around, you would think. He has limitations. I mean, I'm hoping I'm not being too ageist with that. Yeah, I mean, we get into, colorful characters in the storyline and lots of just like, I don't know, interesting ways to get into the complexities of like how we grieve and how we define ourselves and how we deal with past trauma. So I enjoyed the story, and I enjoyed the second one too. It was a little more fantastical or surreal. It's about a family, a man and a woman and their like teenage daughter who moved from Tel Aviv to Beersheba to like a really a ghost town, as it were, going from the big city to a ghost town where they live in this bed and breakfast that's owned by the woman's father. And there's some interesting backstory here about, your life's ambitions and what really happens with them. The wife is doing really well for herself and is trying to sort of like become a CEO, and the husband, like 20 years ago, also wanted to be on that trajectory, but he actually was sort of railroaded out of his job and is currently being a stay-at-home dad and trying to develop an app. But then his daughter, something weird happens with her. First of all, she brings home a dream catcher, which makes me think this is the fantastical element. And then shortly after that, she goes into this comatose sort of state where she's sort of like walking around but barely responsive, and they take her to doctors to analyze brain activity. And it goes into this whole thing about how her dreams are like seeming to last for days. Like, most of our dreams, how we remember them, are much more fleeting, but this young girl's like last for long periods of time, and her dream entries are, they're convoluted, but they just keep going on and on and on with information. And it's becomes centered on like, who is she and how do we help her when, there's no clear medical precedent, I guess, for how to deal with this. I don't know. I mean, I like the characters. I feel like the plot kind of, there's not, kind of can peter out a little after a while. Not much, maybe not as much to do with it. But then again, I'm a character reader, so I like the characters. And, the plot was, it ended ultimately. And so, yeah, I mean, I like these two stories. And the third story, it's going to be a little shorter, and it's the titular story, Jerusalem Beach, which I believe Iddo Gefen wrote about this story in particular on the Jewish Book Council website. This is such a strange title because Jerusalem is not known for its beaches, so he thought before writing this story. So I'll link to his essay down below as well, and I'm looking forward to continuing with the collection. And finally, the last book I have to talk about is on audio. It is Read Dangerously by Azar Nafisi, which I have almost finished by this point in time. And I can share briefly that it's kind of an epistolary nonfiction book where Nafisi is writing letters to her father, her deceased father, where she is talking about various books and how they've influenced her, sort of against the backdrop of her experience with the Iranian Revolution, and then current events in her home in Washington, D.C. around COVID and that sort of thing. But that is definitely all I will be saying about that book. I will be zipping my lips now because I am reading it as an official judge for the BookTube Prize. So the BookTube Prize was started by Robert at Barter Hordes a few years ago. The intent is to judge the best in literary fiction and nonfiction published the previous year in the US. So I am reading this book as a judge for the Octafinals Group H in nonfiction. I have a ballot of 6 books. I'm going to be reading and ranking them. I'll be able to talk about them in detail in a couple of months. But in the meantime, if you would like to know my preliminary thoughts or anything more about the BookTube Prize, I will leave links down below. So that about covers it for me, and yeah, I should be moving on now because a major thing that's happening this weekend, it is my mother's birthday weekend, so I will be leaving my home also in the DC area to go be with her in Baltimore and be with my family, so that'll be fun. But she should expect me back here again in the coming week, because speaking of the BookTube Prize, I'm going to do this tag that I've commandeered called the Would You Read It Challenge. And the purpose of the tag, or the way I use it, is that I go back to previous octafinal rounds of the BookTube Prize for previous years, so I can talk about those books, and I will read the first few paragraphs of books in the ballots and then discuss what I think of them, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I hope you're all having a wonderful weekend. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.